Now that we have discussed these points in summary, let's elaborate and read out the summary in a distinctive manner. This story begins with the most innocent of domestic scenes. Mary Maloney, a housewife in her 6th month of pregnancy, is waiting for her husband to return home. It is a Thursday night and they usually eat out. When Patrick Maloney does come home, he is strangely moody and takes a stronger drink than usual. Mary tries to divert him with the usual domestic comforts, but to no avail. Patrick asks her to sit down, announcing that he has no important matter to discuss with her. Though the reader is never told, it is clear that the Patrick is going to divorce Mary. He ends his speech by saying that he will see that she is provided for and that he hopes there will be no fuss because it might reflect badly on his position in the police department. Now the story begins with a very sweet note wherein Mrs. Melanie is waiting for her husband to return back home. It is a normal fine Thursday evening and everybody is sorted to its extent. Now, as per the Thursday evenings, both Mr. and Mrs. Melanie are go to some fine restaurant to dine out. But eventually this time Mr. Patrick enters with a strange moody behavior and tries to have a very stronger sip of whiskey. Now, Mrs. Melanie tries to comfort him down with all the domestic things that are going around but fails to do so. Instead, Mr. Patrick asks her to sit down and wants to tell her something. And in the due course, which is not clearly explained in the extract, but Mr. Patrick tries to divorce Mrs. Melanie. And out of this, Mrs. Melanie is little taken back. She is dazed off and she gets up and walks off the scene. The announcement that she will lose the man around whom her world revolves puts Mary into a daze of unbelief. Instead of arguing with Patrick, she goes on as if nothing has happened, hoping that this will somehow cause her problem to go away. She prepares to make supper and goes down to the deep freezer. She chooses a frozen leg of the lamb for the meal. Moving like a somnambulist, she walks into the living room. When Patrick tells her that he does not want dinner, Mary moves behind him and hits him over the head with the leg of lamb. Now, on the announcement of her husband leaving her, Mrs. Melanie gets dazed off. She gets upset and in that mere instinct, she gets up, moves to the kitchen and tries to normalize herself. She ignores the situation and feels that after ignoring the situation, maybe her problems will subside down. She goes to the kitchen, moves to the freezer, finds a leg of the lamb and hears Patrick calling her. She moves to the dining room and hears that she doesn't want to take up the dinner as well because he's moving out for the night. In that instinct, in a hilarious and in a dazed off manner, she hits Mr. Patrick on his head with the frozen lamb leg. Patrick falls to the floor with a crash and this brings Mary to her senses. Mary realizes that she has killed Mr. Patrick and though she is willing to take the legal consequences, she fears of her unborn child who might die if she is executed. Her mind is now working clearly and she devises an elaborate deception for the police. She prepares the leg of the lamb and puts it into the oven. Now Mrs. Melanie comes back to her senses when her husband hits the ground, crashes and is dead. She realizes that she will have to face the legal consequences. One, because she is wife of a detective and second, she has killed him. Then she realizes that if she gets executed, her unborn child will also get killed. So in perception to this, she creates a deceptive, elaborate scene and explains it to the police. Moving on. She then goes to her room and gets ready to go out. As she does so, she rehearses the conversation that she will have with the grocer, trying to get the voice tones and facial expressions as close to as normal as possible. This deception is put into operation. Now she goes back to her room, dresses herself up, rehearses her dialogues that she is going to do up with the grocer and tries to make everything look very normal. Then she moves on to the grocer, goes buys the peas and talks to him with a very clear smile on his face, making an impact that nothing has changed. It is a normal fine Thursday evening. She goes to the grocery and uses the exact words that she has rehearsed, so that the whole scene at the grocery appears to be the everyday act of a wife picking up food for her husband's dinner and chatting with the grocer. She then returns home telling herself that she must remain natural and to expect nothing out of the ordinary when she enters the house. Thus, when Mary does arrive, she calls out Patrick as if he was still alive. Her shock at actually finding Patrick's body is almost completely unfeigned, as if she really did not know that she has already killed him. Now she had already mentally prepared herself to behave very naturally so that she does not get caught in any kind of a scenario. Now she goes back home, behaves exactly the way she has to, as she was not expecting her husband to be dead. She is trying to decept the police, the whole crime scene, and manipulate things easily. Mary then calls the police and reports that Patrick Melanie has been killed. Two police officers, one of whom is Jack Noonan, arrives at the house. Both men are familiar to Mary, who knows most of Patrick's friends on the police force. They begin the investigation into Patrick's murder by recording Mrs. Melanie's story about going out to get food for supper and coming back to find Patrick's body. Noonan, completely taken in, comforts Mary, asking if she would rather go to her sister's house or stay with his wife. Mary, however, stays throughout the investigation. When a doctor and other specialists arrive to examine the body, the police conclude that Patrick was killed by a blow to the head with a blunt instrument, probably made of steel. Now, Mary tries to call up the police, explains them the whole scene, deceptively manipulates each and every situation to the police people who are already known to her husband. She is very well acquainted to all her husband's colleagues and friends as well. This way, the police people who are there available on the crime spot have sympathy for Mary and they ask her to leave this place or stay with the investigation. The police begin searching the house for the murder weapon, but with no success. Mary asks Noonan for a drink, then invites him to have one himself. Soon, all the police are having a drink and the investigation has become a consolation scene. Finding that the lamb is now cooked, Mary asks the police officers to eat it because she owes it to Patrick to extend the hospitality of his home to his friends. She finally persuades them to eat the meal as a favor to her. As they do so, they remark that the murder weapon would be very difficult to conceal. One man says to Noonan that the weapon is probably right under our very noses, which causes Mary to giggle. Now at the end, when the all examination of the body is done, all the doctors and the policemen have examined, they come to a conclusion that Patrick was killed by a blow to the head with a blunt instrument which was probably made of steel. Moving on, the police begin to start searching for the murder weapon in the house itself. And in the meanwhile, the lamb gets cooked and Mrs. Melanie offers a drink to the detectives. Now in the due course, the whole of the police investigation team is drinking, having lamb, and the investigation becomes a insulated situation wherein the police officers eat because she owes it to him, because she owes it to hospitality to Patrick's friends. Now in the end, out of a conversation, there is a pun given by one of the officers, that is, probably the weapon is probably right under our very noses, which actually makes Mary to giggle. Now we have the character sketch. I am not pulling up the whole points, but these, if you keep in mind, these are the pointers which can be used to answer various questions related to characterization of Mrs. Melanie and Patrick Melanie. Let's see. Mrs. Melanie. waits for her husband in the evening, prepares for whiskey for him, gives her company with a small drink, does household chores. Her husband hints to leave him live separately, gets emotional, hits him on the head with a frozen leg. Her husband dies, goes to the grocer's shop to remove suspicion, conducts herself intelligently with investigating people, wins the sympathy of cops and detectives, persuades the cops to food and drinks. Now, the character sketch of Patrick Maloney. He's a dutiful detective, works hard and gets exhausted, loves whiskey to remove his fatigue, wants to stay at home, disappoints his wife, tells her that they can't stay together. His wife becomes aggressive and violent, hits him on his head with a frozen leg of lamb, and he eventually dies. This was all for this episode. I hope you liked the summary and the character sketch, and all the very best for your exams.